In this lesson, we're going to be looking at how the body removes metabolic waste. And the learning objectives associated with today's lesson are detailed here. Please note that you do need to understand where the metabolic wastes are removed from. You need to be able to name those organs and identify the different types of metabolic wastes and differentiate between keywords and understand key processes. As ever, the booklet pages associated with this lesson are 21 and 22, and I recommend that you read pages 169 to 171 before you watch this lesson. So the key words I want to draw your attention to are first and foremost excretion, and the organs that we're going to be looking at associated with that are the lungs, the liver, and the kidneys. We're also going to be looking at sweat glands and understanding the process of deamination and how this links to the formation of urea, ammonia, and the link between those things and amino acids. And just as a reminder, we've done the digestive system, and we understand that elimination is the removal of indigestible material from the body, and the most common way of elimination in humans is defecation. We are not going to be looking at that in this lesson. We are going to be focusing on excretion, and it's really important that you are able to differentiate between these two words and be able to give examples in a written exam or test question. So excretion is the removal of metabolic waste from the body. So that key word metabolic, so it's a process that's carried out in the cell. So metabolic waste would be things like carbon dioxide and water. Here we've got a basic cartoon diagram of the key organs that we're going to be referring to and the places where excretion occurs. First things first, we have got the alimentary canal. We can see here that this is the large intestine. This will break down the products of waste from hemoglobin, and those are bile pigments. So this is a metabolic waste, bile pigment. So we have excretion happening via the alimentary canal. We also have the liver, which is a major excretory organ. Substances can pass through here for excretion. Those worn out red blood cells will undergo a chemical process in the liver before they go to the large intestine to form bile pigment. The lungs and the skin shown up here, they produce metabolic waste. So the skin will produce urea, salts and lactic acid in the form of sweat. And we have the lungs, which excrete carbon dioxide and water vapor from cellular respiration. Finally, the principal excretory organs that we have are the kidneys, situated at the back of the abdominal cavity. This excretes toxic materials which are removed by the kidneys via the bladder and urethra. So if we look at the liver first of all, it's located in the upper abdominal cavity. It is situated quite high up in the chest. You can see here that the ribs are protecting most of it. It's large. It's about 3 to 4 kilograms in a full-grown human, so it's a substantial size. And what the liver does is it prepares materials for the process of excretion. We know that excess amino acids cannot be stored in the body. So any protein that we do not use to form other proteins cannot be stored in a similar fashion to carbohydrates or fats. Proteins can be partially broken down into their constituent amino acids, remembering that amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And these amino acids can then be recycled to make new protein structures, such as enzymes and antibodies. So what we know so far is that proteins cannot be stored in the body, but we do know that carbohydrates can be stored as glycogen in the muscles, and a little bit in the liver, and fat can be stored in the body as well. Mostly we see that under the skin as subcutaneous fat. So because we can't store proteins, they have to undergo metabolism. Now what is actually happening here is these constituent parts of the proteins, the amino acids, will start to be broken down, and they undergo an excretion process. So the first stage that happens is deamination. So amino acids undergo deamination, and the location of this is the liver. Now, amino acid metabolism can be used as a source of energy by the body if the fat and carbohydrate stores have run out. So we only really do this in extreme cases because, as we know, carbohydrate is our principal source of energy, and then we move to fat stores. Amino acids are the last resort, as it were. Now, amino acids have got a couple of different parts to it, and one of those parts is called the amino group. So in deamination, as the name suggests, the amino group is removed with the help of enzymes, and this amino group, this amino acid with the amino group removed, is converted to form ammonia, and that eventually becomes urine. So this word equation that you should know is the first step in that deamination process which occurs in the liver. So our excess amino acid that we cannot store reacts with oxygen, and it's converted into a form of carbohydrate which the body uses for energy. So this is how proteins are used as an energy source, as a last resort. They have to undergo this deamination process, so we end up with a carbohydrate and a toxic compound called ammonia. So this cartoon diagram is explaining what happens. This entire structure in the middle here, this is an amino acid, and the part shaded in orange is an amine group. So during deamination, remembering that occurs in the liver, during that process of deamination, the amino group or the amine group is converted into ammonia. Now, ammonia is toxic, so we can't keep it like that. So ammonia then gets converted into urea, which is not toxic. And this, when it dissolves in water, becomes urine, which we can excrete from our bodies. You can see here on the other side, what we have left over is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So this part becomes our carbohydrate group. Now you may be wondering why we have the letter R here. So this entire structure that I'm showing you is the basic scaffolding of what an amino acid is. There are 20 different amino acids, and because they have a different R group. So this R just represents the different forms of amino acid in a simple way. But what we're focusing on here is that once we remove the amine group, we are left with carbohydrate. And through a series of enzyme controlled steps, this can be harnessed to be converted into glucose, which is then broken down in the normal way to acetyl coenzyme A through cellular respiration, and we can have energy forming. The carbon skeleton could also be broken down into carbon dioxide and water, which are metabolic waste that we breathe out via the lungs. We can also form ketone bodies from this, but we're not going to talk about that in this course. So just as a summary, the amino acids that are in excess react with oxygen in the liver, and we undergo deamination, which means that we get a carbohydrate forming, which we can use for energy in respiration, and we have ammonia. Now, ammonia is a toxic substance, so we have to convert that into something safe. So what then happens is, with a little bit of energy in the form of ATP and carbon dioxide, this ammonia reacts with these two things to form urea plus water. And when urea and water combine, they form urine, which can be safely excreted from the body. So when we look at the metabolism of proteins, we understand that this process occurs in a stepwise way to make our waste products safe. We know that ammonia is also very soluble in water and it's highly toxic. So this is why we have this conversion process happening. And as I've mentioned before, when urea, which is much safer, is dissolved in water, we have urine, which is excreted through the kidneys. We also talked about the fact that the remaining carbohydrate region is used in aerobic or anaerobic respiration to form energy in the form of ATP. And we know that urea is excreted from the body. Now, interestingly, even though the majority of urea is lost from the body in urine, you do get a small amount in sweat as well, but it is a very small amount. So as a summary, the energy, carbon dioxide and ammonia convert this toxic substance into urea and water, which forms urine. So the liver does other things, and it's a very, very important organ. It will detoxify liver, drugs and antibiotics, and it makes them safe in your body. Now, the liver also deactivates or switches off hormones, which can then be excreted through the kidneys. So any hormones in your body that you don't need to be sending messages anymore, the liver takes care of that for you. And also, the respiratory pigment hemoglobin that attracts red blood cells, when that red blood cell is worn out, this hemoglobin component is broken down in the liver and it is formed into bile pigment, which is a metabolic waste. Now that metabolic waste, as we referred to at the start of this lesson, passes out of the body with feces. So it's the large intestine which becomes an excretory organ for the metabolic waste, bile pigment. So please don't underestimate the power of your liver. Your liver gets rid of toxins, so any sort of detox that you want to do, well, you don't need to start it tomorrow, you're already doing it. Okay, so we're looking at the skin now as another excretory organ. So we know that in this cross section of the skin here, this is the skin surface, this is a hair follicle, you have a sweat gland. So the sweat gland will secrete sweat onto the skin surface, which will then evaporate, and its main function is to cool us down. So the sweat glands will squeeze that sweat onto the surface, and it will play a role in excretion of metabolic waste also. Some of those wastes that the sweat glands secrete are sodium chloride, which is salt, lactic acid, and, as we talked about before, urea. You will also get some drugs being excreted through the skin via the sweat glands. So just to remind you what excretion is, just so we're really clear, it is different from elimination. Excretion is the removal of metabolic waste. So a metabolic waste is the product or the waste product produced by cells of the body. And these metabolic wastes will include carbon dioxide, urea, toxins, excess water, salts, and even some hormones. So just as a reminder yet again, metabolism is all the chemical processes taking place in body cells. So we learned that at the very start of the Year 11 course. So therefore, metabolic wastes are the waste products from cellular processes. So why do we need to get rid of these metabolic wastes? Well, we want to do something called maintaining homeostasis. So as the scales show here, homeostasis keeps things in balance. So if we have too much of a waste product in our bodies, it can actually cause us to be very ill and we are no longer in balance. So our cells will function within these limits. We call them tolerance limits. And while your parameters are within those tolerance limits, everything in your body works fine. And if we go out with those tolerance limits, then we start to have serious problems. So because some of those waste products that we talked about previously are toxic, they have to be removed, otherwise they affect our body's balancing system. So the where these metabolic wastes are secreted are through the skin, the lungs, the liver, and then the kidneys. And in this diagram, what I'm trying to show you here is that the most important excretory organs that we're going to focus on are the liver and the kidneys. So in summary, we know that excretion is the removal of metabolic waste from the body. Excretion occurs via excretory organs such as the skin, lungs, liver and kidneys. Examples of metabolic wastes are urea, excess water, toxins and salts. Elimination is different from excretion. Elimination is the removal of indigestible material from the body, whereas excretion must occur to maintain homeostasis and to ensure there's no build-up of toxic substances within the body. Remembering that homeostasis is about keeping the body in balance. Deamination is a process whereby excess amino acids are broken down, and this occurs in the liver. The amino group in an amino acid is broken down and converted into a toxic substance called ammonia, which is then further broken down into urea, which is non-toxic. Urea will dissolve in water and become urine, which can then be safely excreted via the kidneys. The carbohydrate skeleton left over from that amino acid is broken down to form a carbohydrate, which can then be used in cellular respiration to synthesize ATP. So that's the end of this lesson. Please make sure that you complete booklet pages 21 and 22. Make sure that you have your notes for this section, and please read textbook pages 169 to 171.